For those who don't know, my name's Theo Spiropoulos. I direct the Design Research Lab, and I have the pleasure today to welcome Eric Goldenberg, who's coming to us from Miami. Eric has a long and decorated history in many sort of realms, working as a young practitioner, doing his time in offices like Eisenman Architects and Asymptote. He is based in Miami now for the last 6 years with his wife, Veronica Zalsberg, who they co-run an office called Monad Studios, whose work you may be familiar with. Eric is an associate professor, actually recently got tenure at FIU University. It's Florida International University, and for quite some time now I've been following Eric's work, in particular with his kind of attitude and response to a certain kind of idea of pulsation within architecture. Eric has been developing and is one of the leading practitioners in the States who's been looking at digital design and its role, both culturally and in practice. And with that, I think, has evolved a kind of curiosity where he tries to situate his work within his practice, within a much larger contemporary kind of discourse. With that, Pulsation was kind of born. It's the title of a book, Pulsation in Architecture, which was published last year. And it's an interesting kind of survey that crosses people like Peter Eisenman, Greg Lynn, these kind of generational figures, and more contemporary figures like Hernan Diaz-Alonso, Tom Wiscombe, people like Rob Kukuja, and others. And so I think today's discussion will really be looking at issues to deal with affect, more sensorial issues to deal with Eric's preoccupation with sound, and this kind of idea of cross-disciplinary work, which I think he'll be sharing some of that work with us. With that, as this is Eric's first time at the AA, I'd like to extend a warm greeting to him and to Veronica for coming and sharing some of their work with us today. And with this, if we can welcome Eric to the AA.
Thank you, Theo. Indeed, I feel welcome. I was just this morning, I committed a crime. I took a half-hour delay to arrive to a coffee with Theo. I thought that was really a terrible thing to do here in London. Not where we live now in Miami, neither where we used to be in New York. Theo worked at Eisenman Architects right before me, just right before me. So now it's a fantastic opportunity for me not only to be here with my partner Veronica Salzberg, but also with Theo Spiropoulos and get to know the work that he's shown me around the school, and to actually bring to you some of the ideas and kind of ridiculous things that we do and open them up for discussion. I'm just going to shut up for a little while. This thing that I'm going to play now is a little bit long, perhaps good also to set the mood. Thanks. So while we switch to the computers, I'm going to present a couple of things today. One is, as Theo was describing, just a year ago, this book came out called Pulsation in Architecture, and to me it was a project that started many years ago, many more years ago than as many years as the digital project kind of existed, stemming from Columbia University. I would say at least 15 years ago. We like to say the number 15 because Jeffrey Kipnis always says that movements in architecture last, when they're intense, no more than 15 years, or something like that. And I understand Jeffrey Kipnis played some kind of role here in the past. So I brought some material from the book just to share with you and discuss it as we play along. And otherwise, I also have, I want to share with you some of the work that we do at Monad Studio with Veronica and our collaborators. And this that I just played now is one of the one of the different kinds of collaborations we're engaging in with lately. And it's kind of, we had this interesting conversation this morning with Theo about how actually the work has more of a chance now. The work that's really, I'm going to just say this, that is not something that Theo said, but it was part of this conversation. The kind of autonomy of form that some of the infusion, I would say, at Columbia University, but also some of the infusion coming from Peter Eisenman, the whole discourse ever since the 70s in New York about autonomy in architecture, about the interiority of the discipline, I think has reached a kind of a point of no return in a certain way. And I'm seeing how a lot of the work that is done, especially in academia and in quite a bit here, continues to question that and to open up a kind of research that's more into the types of frictions that happen at the urban level, but also happen transdisciplinary wise. And the work that is in this book, stored in this book almost as potential, is what I would like to call a eulogy. I meant it as a way of kind of finishing off a series of very long engagements with that kind of intense autonomy of form. So yes, it is about affect, and that's already an abused word. Affect in the sense of the kind of projective energy of stored potentials that comes out as effects to us, and that which you can certainly program into your work by very precise operations of geometry. This is it's a little funny to also come out and talk about the book. I'm always very, it also defines also the kind of work that we do at Monad Studio. The book is just not an end in itself for us, but rather a vehicle to keep certain conversations going and to intensify questions. And this particular one started with a conference that we did in Miami that brought together people like Jeffrey Kipnis, Hernandez Alonso, Ali Rahim, Ferda Colatan, David Rui, Marcelo Spina, an artist named Perry Hall, whose work I really recommend, and myself. And we were just evolved that into a really much larger compendium of what we thought was a cross-sectional view on some of the very interesting practices involving minima forms as well, and other people that we think are tangentially also, if not very directly related to these issues. I mean, what I mean by pulsation is really the kind of rhythmic affect that oozes through certain kind of intensified digital work. And I jotted down some notes for me so I don't get lost in all of these. But if I had to say what pulsation is in a very simple sentence, I would say it's a stored potential stored potential that gets unleashed as rhythm. And there's so many different ways in which one can assume that takes shape, and so many consequences to that. But so I sort of developed a criteria to kind of group together a bunch of work of people that would probably feel very uncomfortable knowing that they're grouped together. Kind of like what happened to the Decon show in 1988 at MoMA. And anecdotically, the kind of liner notes to the book were written by Terence Riley, who hosted that show at MoMA. And this is just, dare I compare, the work that we see on the right, the whitish work, is something we did a few years back, project for Buenos Aires, which is, I think, in a complete opposition of what, in some sense, to what we're seeing by Peter Eisenman on the left of the screen, whereby there's a kind of a scalar, interesting kind of topological and scalar familiarities, and it's the same person who's worked in both, just anecdotal, as many other people have worked also on that Eisenman project, the City of Culture of Galicia, but it was foundational for our practice and for me personally to understand some issues relative to rhythm and how certain ideas about segmenting a kind of notational device that helps to segment territory and to help to provide a kind of different engine to produce form can be deployed, and also it has consequences at the level of scale significantly. Consequences good and bad. Some more of these are just samples of what's in the book, really like a teaser to show you today. You're seeing, you'll see that several people that participated on the PS1 MoMA project are in this book. One of them is Mark Gage, and the other one is Hernandez Alonso. That's not his PS1, but it's really, there's a lot of talk in this book about ornament and the kind of resurgence of, which is, goes without saying, right? You said, my career is decorated. That was a nice term to accidentally use. Really, there's much more to it. I think that the kinds of, even music is just pure structuring of ornament, I would think. And that's, it's a lead on to something I'm going to talk to you slightly afterwards in the conversation. But the kind of idea of immersion, that space that is purely immersive, and the kind of space that it's, that has a certain impact on the body in terms of the kind of psyche and the way it situates the mind in the space, is this kind of, again, this kind of pulsational effect or pulsatile effect. And it registers really across multiple scales, anywhere from the scale of the Newton's objects, such as Greg Lynn's coffee set, or Hector Guimard, or Sullivan, or David Rui, and we can see how ornament, or the kind of intensified articulation of matter, really can travel multiple scales. And here's, I'm just going to run through some of these practices quite briefly, but to me, and you will find, should you get your hands on this fantastic book, that there's a kind of clarification chapter per chapter of what is really relevant with regards to this understanding, or these kind of filters for understanding the culture that we are all immersed in, right? The culture of intensified use of technology for representation and for making, basically. This is the project that we were just talking before, and it's kind of, for me, was this idea of killing off a kind of generation of work, not of people, was important, and to see that the kind of godfather of this type of work was Eisenman, and really intensively using deploying techniques in this project, whereby many of us learned how to deal with realities, also using them. It's a relevant issue to do, I think, to kind of explore what are the tangents of generational, the kind of thresholds also in terms of generational transmission. And then you see some more of what I was just reading in terms of coding. This project is really fully about analog type coding. There's a lot of imposed coding on the project, not the kind of coding you do, but the kind of coding that was necessary in a very rudimentary way to set up rules for making this project, really, and to transmitting this project more than 10 years ago, at a time when it was not, that didn't happen in such a sophisticated way. And it's out there, probably at 70% built now in Galicia, Spain. And that's kind of some of the drawings that we did there at the office. anyway, just moving through, you'll see familiarity. You'll see projects here that are not really interested with a book like this in just outputting what's the latest shed that it's out there, but rather kind of reflecting upon an intensified period where kind of it was formational for many of us, and it's certainly having an impact on what you do here. The same way, let's say, that the Institute in New York and what Eisenman developed in the 80s, 70s with some other people is what opened up the doors for other practices to emerge in terms of autonomy and form. And then, to me, actually, what's critical also is seeing that there is, in some cases, in some practices, there's a deliberate intent at kind of grasping what are the potentials of rhythmicity in architecture and the kinds of possible plays of things, important and old, such as repetition and difference, right? These issues that the whole culture affected by our understandings or trying to, our kind of easy digestions also of Deleuze, and that which affected, several thinkers and, trickling down through architectural studios and, philosophy turned digital in a way. That's an easy way to kind of put it and get out of it quickly. But this is the work of Ali Rahim and Hina Jamel, contemporary architecture practice. And I'm just gonna kind of sort through quickly to this because I'm not also, like I said, it's an integral part of a practice these days to be able to reflect upon that which is the generational discourse, the kind of spirit of the times which you're a part of, but it's something significantly that sets us apart from, this is our dear friend David Rui, who's friends of Theo as well, and an important dialogue going on also transoceanic with him here. But it's kind of important to, as a practice, I think, in all the multiple aspects, and one way in which we can talk about interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, is also the discipline of the discursive aspect of what we do, and how that also can feed back into you as a designer. So our work, Monad Studios' work, is also one of the chapters in this book, as one of the many 32 or so that there are. And this is Evan Douglas is clearly one of the more evident intents at working with in a way that really expresses some of the potential stores in the Art Nouveau, and the kind of ornament really turned into something that it's now driven by technology in a way that it was not possible before. So therefore, opening up to new sets of problems relative to deployment and relative to production and assembly, right? And some of them continue to be unresolved questions, but really this is one of a nice example, the Moon Jelly restaurant in Brooklyn that Evan did. And that's a predecessor to that, one installation whereby this kind of immersion was really first tested there. I'm just moving through. This is, of course, very iconic. And here that Hernan Diaz Alonso was recently to give a talk here as well. And Hernan and I were quite familiar with each other's work, and I kind of collaborated with him in teaching at Columbia University. And he's also from Argentina, like I've omitted to say, Veronica and I are from Buenos Aires, Argentina, originally. And Hernan's practice has been also a fundamental, kind of like a stepping stone also for this book, in ways in which he has really problematized the question of the image in architecture, and the ways in which he thinks of it almost as a filmmaker, and the kinds of, exacerbated expressionism of it, which really tests the material, the digital that is, into realms that are really, fun to explore, and really has produced a lot of interesting contagion across the academia, good and bad. And this is quite interesting to us also, is seeing how much of the work that's transpiring through this book is also really moving through scales in a really with ease, from the scale of utensils to the scale of installations to the scale of urban plans. Like we can just look at how in these 3 pages, how we move through that with ease. And this is probably the work that I'm most comfortable with in this book. I mean, looking back, and this is probably going to shift through the years, and as we continue to situate what we think of spatial pulsation. But this to me is a really engaging project, Tabacalera project by Zephyr Arch, Hernan, Diaz Alonso, whereby there's really much more friction than in many other projects that I've seen that we collectively all explore, whereby all the new materials are tested through these particular frictional devices, which in themselves have and are the product of frictions, right? And also kind of esoteric aesthetics, of course. We don't hate that. That's as far as showing you a tease of this book, Pulsation in Architecture. What I also have to offer today is some of the work that we do at Monad Studio with Veronica. Let's see. Also, just to continue this conversation about transdisciplinarity, I think a good way to finish off a book and forget about it is just to start a different one. I thought before going into academia and trying to get tenure that I would do just one book to get that thing out of the way and go back to designing and shit out of this life. And instead, we're on to the second book already called Feedback, plain and simple feedback. So to me, it's quite an interesting introduction that also Io gave, because really we are trying to move from the kind of purely disciplinary work of architecture and trying to see really what and how architecture can open up and contribute to a larger discussion, right? Discussions with artists, collaborations across different media, collaborations with questioning really how one has to operate, and how it is also very interesting to kind of disseminate a little bit of the focused education that we got through schools and through practices, and then being able to kind of disseminate it throughout different types of testings that are not necessarily at the core of the discipline, but it's kind of liberating, really, to look like a little video like we did at the beginning. Anecdotically, the video that I showed at the beginning is a collaboration with two artists from Belgrade that I never met. I don't think I'll ever meet them in my life, but we were able to produce a really nice mood ambient piece, footage that we generated, and then they created both the music and the animation of it. But this new book, to me, is really something very engaging, because it's moving also to the territory of the relation, the kinds of interesting dialogues across architecture and music that are literal and not so literal also, that the moment you begin to wander into this particular mid-terrain or terrain vague, it's that you discover we discover how incredibly close we are to musicians operating, not because of the technology, but because of some very deeply ingrained basic concepts in dealing with time and space, although there are definitely different sensibilities of a composer in music and a composer in design, which is, I feel very comfortable if somebody told me I was a composer in design. But I think that there are lots of potentialities in understanding how for us architects, the kind of operational means and the kinds of aims that you can have in engaging with sound and kind of aural perception, really, in dealing in perception types and cognitive means, is really opening up for us a Pandora's box or plethora of opportunities for the design and even for the technology to push certain bounds of how we show or how we talk to each other in terms of during project, right? While you're in the process of a project. Yes, this is our neighbor. I don't know if you know Yngwie Malmsteen. He brought the Baroque sensibility to heavy metal guitar. We have a little warehouse where Monad Studio functions in North Miami Beach. And we couldn't afford that in New York. That's why we left New York. And many, amongst other reasons. And Yngwie Malmsteen is our right door, next door neighbor. Used to be there all the time. I'm just a poser, if that's not clear up until now. Clearly, I am a poser. That's all. There's nothing natural here. Everything is constructed, artificial. That, I'm a product of this. This is just a panel that we did at Cooper Union, just to generate the new conversation about sonic sensibility. This is what we called it. And David Rui, Ed Keller, Ben Martinson and Michael Young were part of this. It was a fantastic first step towards that book. I'm just anecdotically throwing this out to remind myself that that all the stuff you're going to see now, all the projects that we do, I think they're kind of like, I love the Barbican. It's kind of brutalist exaggerations that are very clearly of this culture. I feel very much at home now that I'm sensing that I forgot that this is a lot of my influence in my career has been looking at that kind of stuff from the 50s, 60s, brutalism, expressionism. But you'll see some of our work. This is just also, I like also quoting old posters in misplaced in other lectures. This is a poster for a lecture we did at Columbia. It was a kind of coming home type thing because both Veronica and I were students at Columbia with professors like I said before, Evan Douglas, Stan Allen, Jeffrey Kipnis, Greg Lynn, Alejandro Sairapolo, all these guys. We had the luxury of having that exposure, and then for us to be able to come back and give a lecture there was a really fun time, and also kind of almost like a regurgitation. Yeah, because Columbia now is completely far removed from what you thought Columbia was at some point. Has been diluted, the kind of whatever it was, paperless culture of back in the day. That's what brought us there in the beginning, like 10 years ago. And now to be able to go back there as this kind of rare bird that regurgitated to the school what the school was a really interesting opportunity. We also, that's one of the interesting upcoming collaborations with our friend Nicolo Casas, who's sitting somewhere there in the back, doing fantastic work with prosthetic architecture. So continue to engage in these dialogues with colleagues that are going to generate new species. But for us, that poster really reflected, part of that poster was that project which we're showing here, and embedded within that is the cover of a monograph, of a very old monograph of another office called Studio Staff, led by Jorge Goldenberg, Teresa Bielus, and Olga Weinstein-Krasuk. That's my heritage of architecture. I have a discipliner, was born into a practice of a very large family, a family of very large architectural practice, just to put it in the right way, order. So I do have certain influences that I think both on my and also Veronica's end, which is slightly different, that have influenced the work in a particular way. Both my parents had a practice that really dealt in social housing in a ridiculously large scale. It meant that they built entire bits of the city. And definitely embedded in that was the notion of, repetition of difference, variation and identity, eidetic memory, rhythmic proliferations, because you gotta organize the lives of 3,000 or 4,000 units of housing in a smart way, sort of. And that's kind of definitely ingrained in how we think about architecture in a way, profoundly perhaps. So just to cut a long story short, I'm going to move through some of our projects. Some of them are quite old at this point, but still worth showing. This is a project we did for Buenos Aires. I'm going to say only a few things about it. I think it's still interesting to us. Any one of these projects, I think we found a way to kind of weave through them in a sort of interesting talk about rhythms, different kinds of rhythms. So the first sort that we have is an anastomosis type of rhythms, which is about this kind of web-like intensified network type morphologies that put together, that create relational characteristics in projects. And this one is a performing arts center in Buenos Aires, which to me, yes, it was based on turbulence and the kinds of things that everybody's inspired by in a way, but to me, the most important thing I may have to say about composition, perhaps, which is something old and really nice, is that we were, in the beginning of our practice, kind of reacting to the culture of the digital exacerbation of homogeneity. And here we are, 10 years later, I would have the same reaction. The kind of still struggles and difficulties that the academia and practice go through in terms of dealing with internalizing difference and recognizing edge like adaptations in projects continue to stun me as a problem that is not fully resolved. So we set out from the start to do projects that will have almost collage-like, a lot of differentiation, that the parts would just be, and that you can also operate as a grafter, like grafting and delineating a project in a way in which, for instance, this grafted itself on top of two water inlets that belong to an old shipyard on the side, considering things about the history of the site and considering scalar shifts within a site and kind of finding several moments of locking into its place rather than just trying to subsume a whole series of aesthetics and impose a completely new aesthetic on a place, which the project does. It was kind of trying to subvert certain issues in terms of that. And then completely opposing the vertical, who has the tallest one, skyline in Buenos Aires that cropped up, just shooting up private space. We thought we'd do a project that can really engage with the urban milieu and produce a horizontality, produce almost like a landscape derived but object-like piece, kind of ambiguous at that. That definitely had a series of counterpoints or contrapposto in terms of rhythmic operations within that today seem a little rudimentary given how culture has advanced in the digital realm. I just shoot through it because there's a lot of, also innuendo and sexual connotations in the kind of aesthetics, which I think are very relevant given also the kind of culture we live in. And this is a second, I probably have 4 projects or 5. This is a project that we did for the victims of a memorial for the victims of the tsunami, the one in Thailand a few years ago. This is how it happens in many young practices. You start a project, then you're dealing in something, and then you go back at it because you're not satisfied a couple of years later, and you can keep tweaking it, and you use it for conferences, you publish it, this and that. So this is the story on this one, which really started from this very simple seed-like courtyard formations. Each one of these is meant to be a courtyard with a little ramp that goes down into the courtyard. And just kind of looking for the most possible variation we could get out of these recombinatorial logics, just using simple nerve curves and very primitive means. We have very few techniques. We own very little knowledge in terms of how to operate digitally, but we try to get out of a lot of mileage out of it. So how much variation could we get out of this very simple piece made of 2 pincers and a courtyard space? So these are the things that you find a lot in Miami. The strangler fig tree, really, that takes over and kind of shares for 100 to 200 years nutrients with another species, and then one kills the other off, and you're left with these fantastic lattices. So this is actually the project, which has 300 meters long at a more or less 220-degree angle coming down towards the beach on a given site, which is a forest. And there was a little drainage channel like this, which we enhanced for the sake of the spectacle of the drama of this water action throughout the project. And all these courtyards do is just set themselves in as many variable positions as there could be, producing lateral friction and thus transmission across the field, and also producing the effect. The scale ultimately is so large, they're not meant to understand or see the project at any time. You don't see it. You just can see 1, 2, 3, or 4 courtyards at a time as you move throughout it, right? There's a kind of perceptual status that you're always challenged as you move through a project, which we're very interested in as well. So then there's all these kind of lateral issues that happen, microecologies, things that get affected by the action of the project, and kind of perceptual mapping that you could generate as you move through the project, and the kinds of celebratory events that take place. So it's a project also marked by these memorialization courtyards, and they have in Thailand these festivities, right, where they activate a memorial. Memorials have cropped up ever since 2011 in awful ways throughout the world, and it's become these very solemn and very pompous and stale projects. We thought we would do something really the opposite, kind of enliven, make something really lively and kind of commemorate life for what life is good. And ultimately, it's really brutalistic, really on the landscape. It doesn't need or want to be gentle, because that's not what it's memorializing. And we continue working, fiddling with this project and kind of ways in which we could generate these these semi-pneumatic, semi-rigid canopies that hover over and can store water and distribute it. As they do, the distributive means, infrastructural means, becomes also structural means, and they become also ultimately railing and perform at multiple ways. And that's kind of what you get as you get closer in scale to the piece, and there's all these kind of lattice-like operations that I've already mentioned. So this is kind of, this one project is alive, happily. It's the project for the Wolfsonian Museum in Miami. We also have another project for them, but this one is a recent project that we did. It's in the very pedestrian artery that really is super fashion driven and super touristic in Miami, where there's a Herzog and de Meuron garage that you may have seen published lately. In the middle of it, we are proposing a satellite pavilion for this museum, which is a museum of design. And this satellite pavilion, all it does is really, it sits there in the middle of a block that has a kind of a dead end street arriving there. And it's plugging into an existing set of canopies and structures done by an architect called Maurice Lapidus in the 60s that set up a pedestrian artery, really, which is activated by the rhythmic presences of these occurrences, like canopies, band shells, shaders, all of that. So this one plugs into a band shell that is really misutilized and non-utilized, and starts with an amphitheater that connects to that, and sets up a series of vestibules, open vestibules, and some partially enclosed, that activate the oblique communication across, which otherwise is like two-way storefronts pedestrian artery. And this is what it does. It sets up these X-like patterns across, and at multiple scales it does that, continues to break down into smaller parts. Even though it's one continuous ligament or filament type piece, which has two moments of connection, then this one with the amphitheater, and this other one that connects to an existing fountain, where the project feeds and really shoots all of that juice across its tube structures. And all it does is really, breathe and augment and enhance the capacity to generate social condensers, a social condensation of activities on a street that is purely about window shopping at either side. So these oblique connections may produce a whole lot of other interesting perceptions of this artery. So yeah, with the kinds of literally feedback to us is an interest that is cultural, that is kind of how architecture can speak to and be spoken by other languages that are kind of close by, but also literally feedback is this idea that there could be material friction, even expressionist friction that generates or unleashes a kind of geometric tension. Right. In this case, this project, on one end of the project, the west end it's got all these little vertical towers that are actually speakers, and that are just purely there to kind of make the project a public engagement, right? And at the moment, we're in talks to keep developing this, hopefully, but it's very much alive. And all it does is really, through these kind of oblique and X-like patterns, allow for the existing flow on this Lincoln Road artery to just be channeled in a different way and to be absorbed momentarily by a project that then slows down and then feeds back the people onto the Lincoln Road artery. That's what it does. So there you go. That's kind of what it's looking like as it keeps evolving. So basically I have a few more minutes, right? That's then again what these loudspeakers will do, and also it is definitely, I think this project gives you a kind of temperature of what we do here is very, somebody would say sculptural effect, although that thing does not exist in architecture that much, really. You cannot talk about it that way, but it's definitely muscular, and it's definitely driven by a certain impulse to allow for the figural to become fully expression. And this is the other project that we're doing with the Sonja Museum. This is really moving on. It's an exhibition that takes just two chunks of cultural production of what is craft. It looks at the Art Nouveau period, the beginning of the previous century. And it also looks at where craft is at today in terms of digital production. And it really just, it doesn't propose an evolution of craft linearly, but rather looks at these two moments of craft. And it's going to set up little dialogues between architects of the two periods and designers. For instance, it's putting together Mark Gage with Hector Guimard, Hernán Díaz Alonso with Victor Horta, Greg Lynn with Henry van der Velde, and David Rowe and Carol Klein with Louis Sullivan. Is going to put Minima Force with somebody, hopefully. And then this is what the exhibition does. It really takes elements that the museum has in their collection from Hector Guimard and Victor Horta. That's an inkwell up there on the right. It's a fantastic inkwell, this size by Victor Horta, which we 3D printed, reproduced, 3D printed and tweaked and modified as part of what the show will contain also, kind of modified versions of some of these pieces. And this is a set by Greg Lynn. This is the original set by Henry van der Velde. There's clear dialogues that exist, deliberate ones. And then this is Hernán Díaz Alonso's kind of in the family. This is David Rui's piece. And this is some of the tweakings that we've done to this, working in Maya. All of this is Maya. It's just very old and we love it. Love working in Maya. Love delineating, being old-fashioned about it. And just try to take that away from me, I'll kill you. So I was going to actually call this lecture something else, but I can't say that, right? Okay, whatever. Yeah, some people know. So in any case, that's what we're doing. Poor Victor Horta, we keep fiddling with that. And this is what the show will do. It's actually two linear galleries separated by a double height space, and there's some pocket exhibition spaces too, only one we can use. So what we do is they have an existing living room set full from the style Floreal, from the Italian Art Nouveau, which we're unraveling and putting on the walls of the second gallery. And the first gallery is just a bunch of exhibition areas, or let's say display environments we set up near the walls, and these are all interconnected by some vines that will be used for light sconces. But really, it's about recreating the kind of immersions, the kind of immersive space of the Art Nouveau, where it's full underwater type immersion, the sensations that ooze from that kind of sensibility, which we're not far from at all, the sensibility of some of the work of our contemporaries. So you just move through the scale of the hand, scale of the body, scale of the room, the urban scale. This kind of web will take you through that, and that's kind of what it looks like, and it keeps evolving. This is more what it looks like today, and there is some repetition in all this madness. So there is some logistics that keep being tweaked in terms of optimizing the production of what will be assembled. We're going through some prototypes now, but you can see here an example of one of these vitrine environments, really, and then how they are about engaging the body and bringing the body in close proximity with what's being displayed. And there's some open ones with shelving and whatnot. But the key is that all of this is kind of one big long knot loop. This is I don't have any qualms in showing you the wireframe, screen captures of what's being processed today. But this is where the status of this is at. And you see one of the. We had a show for another gallery in Miami that asked us to just make one of these vitrines with nothing to exhibit in it. So that was another testing we do. This is the backdoor entrance to the museum that has all this fantastic wiring, completely cut on the kind of backdoor type activity. And then this became what we devolved to the curators, told them that this project is really kind of feeding off this kind of energy. That's on the other gallery. It's more like a spine that will be surrounded by this unraveled Art Nouveau piece. And this has opportunities to engage the body positions in different ways. I think I'm going to just move through this stuff and get to here. This is the previous to last. This was I consider this project is quite old for us, 2008, but the way we thought of it was a very, it's a PS1 competition that MoMA organizes every year, where you have to be nominated, and it becomes kind of an honor to be a part of that. And then you get, whether you win or not, you get to be exhibited at MoMA. And that was a really nice thing for our career. We were nominated by Terence Riley, who's the man that originally created this program at MoMA. And our proposal was really not to do any sort of installation, any sort of pretense of being artists. Is the exact different opposite position that we have now. So that's what's interesting to me about showing and discussing it today. It's really, we try to do the most compressed piece that we could do on the site, almost call it a building. And we're having dinner the other day with Tom Wiscombe, that you probably know him from Emergent. I don't know, Tom Wiscombe, architect. Tom Wiscombe's proposal was a predecessor to ours that we were really looking at, we tried to make an architectural statement where other people were trying to make artistic statements. So this project, what it does is hangs on and hugs the longest open courtyard wall that leads on to the access to the museum. And also, as it does that, it sets up a series of circulatory operations. One that allows you to go through the body of the whale, in a way, underneath the canopy of the project. A second one that allows you to bypass a project entirely in your fast route to the museum, and whereby you perceive it as facade, versus in the other one you perceive it as being within the project. And a bunch of other cracks and openings and slices that allow you to minor traversing minor routes. And then a spine for privacy, because this is meant for private parties of to 5,000 people every weekend for the whole summer. It's a summer pavilion. We didn't win, didn't get built. So regardless, these were the strategies there, and there's a lounge little space where everything gets unraveled and it's completely open. This is the structure. I mean, there's something about perception and rhythmicity that still I find it important to show this project. It was all also about how to produce these curvilinear morphologies that we like and entertaining, but really how to do that without using any curvilinear surface at all. So how do we figure out a way in photographing that, you know, David Hockney used first, and then Rick Bialis used afterwards to show and portray their own ideas and processes of working through the lens of the camera. And then we also understood how something which is completely excessively triangulated, like this Astoria Queens train tracks that are really 2 blocks away from the project, where we've seen all these drug deals and whatnot, stories in many flicks in TV, are really inspiring in the sense of the kind of vectorial use and the kinds of our capacity to really comprehend that at once, which is really not possible. So you have aural view, and then you also have focal view, and then how you negotiate that with all sorts of fragmented perceptual segments. So that's what we gathered from here, took out of here, and that's what is invested in the project. That kind of energy of kind of fragmented perceptions, and that's what we devolved on the site, really. And there's a sorts of simple. This is the simplest we were been able to get up until now. We should probably revisit this simplicity and get more commissions. And then there is a certain kind of economy of means. They give you a very low budget. Back then they gave us 80 grand, 80,000, not 80 quid, to that you were expected to triple that with sponsors and whatnot, just to get it done, which we did. But we got like second place. We didn't win. Work AC won with a horrible project that you may have seen with planters and whatnot. And we love Work AC's work is fantastic. So, and this is what it does on the site. Really, it's meant to activate the kind of leisure events that this party promotes, and really has a very bland program. What they give you, they give you a brief that is very nondescript. So it's much more about what you are up to, what you're investigating that they want to feature. I guess this is where our investigations of pulsation were manifested very clearly at some point in our career. So it still is relevant for me to show this very primitive project. And yeah, well, I want to show one quickly that I promised Theo I would show him. And that's moving fast in old and back in time, but this is now. This is a little tower that we're doing in Buenos Aires, where again we're kind of toning down the act to gain more of a chance to explore really these frictional aspects, the kind of feedback between parts that we're talking about, that ultimately produce a feedback effect across the project, kind of ripple effect across the project. Is a 14 by 10.5 meter lot in really prime real estate in Buenos Aires for a client that owns a cell phone company and just needs this as a flagship kind of private office. It really, it's a very simple plan. The plan, we have, we have the formation to do these kinds of things in an effective way. So what matters here is that we're still working with David Farnsworth, who's the over Arab consultant. We worked first with us on the PS1 project, and he's advising on the kind of structural moves that we can or should do. The whole project is really one simple skin, or not simple, but the whole thing is the skin in ways in which it can be implemented using a precast concrete, and then we'll investigating what are our chances of getting that done elegantly and precisely in Buenos Aires, where luckily there's a really good craft in existence. So to me, this is still about pulsation operations that register in the kind of fluctuations of the wrapper of the project. That doesn't mean that we should give up on inflecting that into the life of the interior of the body of a project, but this is where we are at, trying to get this built. So you see some of the effects that we are after here with aerators, the curb style aerators, in ways in which the building is also tuning itself to the path of the sun, and how the moves are trying to register that. And that also is a kind of production of feedback. Thank you. Oh, absolutely. I'd love to take questions.
Is there any questions for Eric?
Can you talk a little bit about your move to Miami and really qualitatively?
Since this is being recorded, this is our master tool.
Please, be careful with that.
Let's use this.
Can you talk a little bit qualitatively
Where
about?
is this coming from? Yes, talk about what?
Can you talk qualitatively about the sort of change in process from New York to Miami in your work now?
Yes, thank you for that question. It's a good question. Not sure there is any qualitative change. If you're asking qualitatively, how has it impacted us? Or are you asking about the difference between New York and Miami as cities? But regardless, I can speak to both things. It has been an amazing situation for us to have the opportunity to migrate, first of all, from Buenos Aires to New York. And that kind of lifestyle is very similar. The kind of architecture culture that I was born in led me to want to move away from it and explore a completely new ground, which was to me at the moment the interest in digital technologies and the ways in which they were affecting that culture, which I thought I knew well. We're talking 2000, so I'm going back to answer that question. We're talking 2000 and then going 2001 and 2 to Colombia, take all these great classes, and then working with Eisenman, working with Asymptote, and being in New York, and also being, as we started teaching, both of us, I taught at Pratt, Columbia, other places, and participating on the whole kind of circuit of New York in academia and / practice was really fantastic, and it's like a drug. You want to be on reviews, you want to get your friends to your reviews, and you want to generate more dialogue, and it becomes very self-referential. So it was a blessing that in more than one way that our second kid was going to be born, and then that helped us to decide to move to Miami, along with what we thought was an interesting opportunity to engage with the profession with more opportunity in Miami. And then, what happened as an opportunity in changing is completely changed our lives in terms of how you live and how you operate, and the fact how you move even in the city, and how you have to do that in Miami in a completely different way. But also gave us a lot of space for any practice that starts in a city like this or New York, where it's very intense. Yes, there's a lot of sophistication in the culture and stuff you crave and stuff you give yourself the luxury of not even going to this or that show but it's there, right? It's kind of very Woody Allen-esque type thing. Somebody was telling me, but in Miami or any place like Miami, kind of away from the center of or away from the vortex, you get, or what happened to us is we got noticed. Much more so than if we were in New York or London, say, or Berlin or Tokyo. We were already ingrained in the culture of discussions in New York. The moment we stepped away, we were regarded slightly differently. We were able to generate with more of a laid-back attitude that we appreciate in Miami. We were able to generate a good number of new projects and things that helped us to come back to New York, actually, for the PS1 project, for instance. So qualitatively, it's a fantastic, elastic condition one can set up stepping in and outside of the vortex of cultural relevance, So today, I got tenure now at Miami, FIU in Miami. That means that they want me for life. We'll see what that means. It's a little weird, but it's great to be here, and I'll take more questions. Shoot.
Hi. I love the fact that you linked somehow.
Higher, please.
Sorry, you hear me?
No.
Okay. Now?
Yeah.
Awesome. So I love the fact that you link your work to music, because there's this thing that you actually understand a new language when you can hear to music made in that new language, right? So that sets up two questions for you. One is, they're both metaphorical. So one is, do you believe the music is coming along together as a unified music? And second, do you think the audience is ready to understand and listen to that music?
The first question I did not understand.
So metaphorically, you linked your work to music, right?
Architecture with music, yeah.
All right. Mm-hmm. And there's this saying that you understand a new language when you can understand to music made in that new language.
Yes.
So the first question is, do you think the music is coming along together as a unified?
Yeah, well, it's one question really that you're asking, and I think that we are equipped here at AA, at Columbia, whatever, any good school that is well-versed, sophisticated in digital means of production and also thinking, because I was very glad to hear that you first get exposed to a boot camp of digital stuff in the first year simultaneously with a great amount of very good seminars, right? So in order to kind of understand the culture with which you're going to operate, that prepares you to deal in problems that are conceptual, the kind of questions that come back to you because of the craft that you have and the kind of cultural situation with which you understand that craft. It prepares you wouldn't believe, to have dialogues with people completely outside of this realm in a very informed way, because you're confronting evolutionary problems of technology versus culture that other people are confronting at the same time that we are confronting. But they have different sensibilities, they have a different attitude. I'm having now a studio, my studio that I'm teaching now, the thesis studio on the graduate level at FIU. The students are forced to collaborate with students in the music technology class of the college. And everybody's going into some alley that exists in Miami. They have to analyze the alley. It's a 15-block alley where all sorts of perversities happen. So they have to kind of just analyze it. It's like site analysis for 3 months. That alone is kind of coming to your question, but it's a really good question. We prepare, our musicians prepare, or is music somewhat accepting of the kinds of complexities we bring into? And I think they're both such comprehensive disciplines, that they should have a kind of way of assimilating problems one to the other. I'm hoping, we're just exploring, right? Some people have done way more than us, with their practices in terms of these. I think the possibilities of expression are so collectively are so interesting.
Is there a question?
Can I ask a question? Should I pick a target? how's the AA treating you? Or whoever is that, you? I mean, how does I was walking around with Theo, and he was just showing me what the students are doing, kind of cultivating these experiments. So I wonder, how do you feel? Anybody wants to pick up this? Could be you or anybody else. What I'm saying is how you feel about cultivating species that are material, and where is that going? Take up the question, come on.
Well, I think it's a quite I don't know. It's interesting how you start like dealing with some materiality, and sometimes like you start like making some experiments, and you really don't know what you're gonna get. So I think I don't know. That's exciting about.
Well, I think it's more liberating than working the way we've been working, because then you get material responsiveness that's going to force a different agenda as you're moving through what you thought your agenda was, probably, no?
Yeah.
So we want to do that. I want to be stealing from all that I've seen today. Say again?
The thing is, like Kevin Kelly puts it, when creative thinking is somehow put into a fluid network that works together to create new creative ideas, new works become valuable. So the AA, it is one of those fluid networks.
I'm pretending that I'm understanding what you're saying, but I can't understand one word of what you're saying. And that speaks to the music in the room and the fantastic, but I feel you, dude. I feel your pain. This is my same pain. Thank you. Yes.